What if? There would be little progress and creativity in the world without these two words. What if? And applying these two words to the past, to already played out events, can be just as useful as directing the question toward the future. W.P. Kinsella loved to direct this question toward the future. What if someone kidnapped J.D. Salinger? What if Roberto Clemente appeared in a life raft years after his plane crashed into the ocean? What if the ghost of Shoeless Joe Jackson walked out of a cornfield in Iowa? Regarding the adaptation of the novel Shoeless Joe into the screenplay, movie Field of Dreams, director Phil Alden Robinson asked a crucial what-if question about the book that led to a phenomenal improvement, which we will talk about tonight. When asked what made Field of Dreams so good, Field of Dreams writer and director Phil Alden Robinson said,
The book that it was based on, Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella, was a very magical, smart, wonderful book, and we just tried to do what the book did. And what's so fulfilling to me is that I see audiences coming out of the theater reacting exactly the way I did when I put that book down, when I finished reading that book.
There are many great characters, themes, and plot twists taken from the novel Shoeless Joe. But for people who've only seen the movie, there are so many fascinating, unexpected differences between the film Field of Dreams and the novel Shoeless Joe. One of these differences, a character named Eddie Sissons, has such an unbelievable story that I've devoted an entire episode to exploring the what-ifs of this deleted character, and also what happened to Eddie Sissons and his journey inside and outside the novel. It's a trip. But tonight we'll look at some of the most jarring differences between the movie and the novel. What was lost, what was gained, and a very important message in the novel that never made it into the film.
This book really should have never been written. The film should have never been made.
I sort of have this feeling that one of the reasons I was born, was to be part of this, to get this out into the culture.
A lot of studio people, I think, were just hoping that it would die a quick death. What they didn't count on was the word of mouth, that people would see it and then just say, oh my God, you have to go see this movie. It ended up defying the odds.
Midnight Library of Baseball presents Season 2, The Making of Field of Dreams. From unlikely inception to enduring impact across generations. And as always, no loud music or jarring sounds. I'm Ben Orlando. Honestly, it was terrible. These were the words literary editor Lawrence Kesenick used to describe W.P. Kinsella's first draft of Shoeless Joe. Honestly, it was terrible. And people have no idea. The millions of people who watched and loved Field of Dreams don't know what might have happened, how this great short story could have crashed and burned. And we come back to the what if. What if Lawrence Kesenick had not provided his valuable input? What might have happened? During our interview, Kesenick underplayed his role in editing and shaping Shoeless Joe. He said he could have done more in the editing process. But what he did say was that when he received those garbage pages from W.P. Kinsella, and he told him to write to the level of the short story, he changed the course of history. One of the greatest misconceptions about novels and stories is that they're written by one person. On the surface, it makes sense. After all, there's only one name on the cover, the author. But even great writers need help. Think of a great hitter like Aaron Judge today. Judge has all the skills. He's put up ridiculous numbers the past few seasons. but he still loses his way from time to time. He falls into slumps. And you'd think this guy knows what he needs to do and how to make corrections. But sometimes even the best can't see it. Lawrence Kassanek said that Kinsella was an uneven writer, and Kinsella biographer Willie Steele backed up this opinion when he said not all of Kinsella's work was gold. At this point, I've read many of Kinsella's novels and stories, and I agree. And Shoeless Joe is clearly different. As Kassanek said,
I asked him to send me everything he'd written up to that point. And he sent me a whole slew of other stories, just manuscripts of things that hadn't been published. And I went through all this stuff. I read every single bit of it, and I ended up right back at Shoeless Joe, Jackson Comes to Iowa. It was so good.
Shoeless Joe, the novel, like the short story, does stand out among Kinsella's great body of writing. And it stands out among other novels by other authors. As Kassanek remarked, Shoeless Joe won the Houghton Mifflin Prize, which was not given out every year, but was awarded only when the judges considered a work above and beyond. This is due to the creativity of the work and the depth of characters, but it's also because of the writing at the line level. This folksy, down-to-earth prose is mixed with beautiful lyrical sentences and wonderful metaphors and similes. There are many memorable lines in Field of Dreams. A few weeks ago, I received a message on social media from a group dedicated solely to trading quotes from Terence Mann, the reclusive author in the film played by James Earl Jones. But for all the wonderful, memorable lines in the movie, there are dozens more in the book. And of course, many of the memorable lines from the film are extracted word for word from the novel Shoeless Joe. But people who've only seen the film missed out on many additional gems from the book. For example, from the character Ray Kinsella, quote, "I wonder if there are soft-spoken voices who deliver assignments to all of us at various times. It is nice to think that I have company, that others dance to the muted music I hear." End quote. Here's another, and this is after Ray hears the voice and has to make a tough decision. Quote, "Now I stand ready to cut into the cornfield, to chisel away a piece of our livelihood to use as dream currency." End quote. And one more. Quote, "Once you've been touched by the land, the wind never blows so cold again, because your love files the edges off it." End quote. But more than the lines themselves, I want to talk about the differences between the novel and the film, and the significance of sections left out of Field of Dreams. In both book and film, we have Ray Kinsella, his wife Annie, their daughter Karen, and the brother-in-law Mark, who's trying to get them to sell the farm. There's the building of the field, Shoeless Joe Jackson, the road trip, and Doc Graham. A lot of the major themes are still there, but again, there are differences. The novel starts out just like the 20-page short story, Shoeless Joe Jackson Comes to Iowa. Ray hears a voice and he builds a field. Except in the book, he doesn't build a whole field. He only builds left field. In the movie, there's a montage of him toiling over and completing the entire field, but it doesn't seem to take so much time. In the novel, it takes him 3 seasons to simply complete left field. And there's nothing else. But left field is most important because that's where Shoeless Joe plays. And when Shoeless Joe finally arrives, that's what he comments on. Quote, "God, what an outfield. What a left field. This must be heaven." End quote. It doesn't take much. Only left field to satisfy Shoeless Joe. So it's interesting to visualize, as Ray Kinsella is talking to Shoeless Joe, that there's only a well-manicured left field instead of, an entire ball field. And then Shoeless Joe says, if you complete other parts of the field, I can bring other guys. We can play games. And so in the novel, Ray Kinsella slowly but surely completes section after section, month after month, and he talks about the progress as he puts in home plate and purchases the bases for $28.95 for a set of 3. And I like this difference, and it demonstrates what's possible in a book and not so much in a film. These great details that ground us and balance the magic that's also going on. And Ray Kinsella comments in the book on his itchiness as it's taking so long. Quote, "The process is slow, as dreams are slow, as dreams suspend time like a balloon hung in midair. I want whatever miracle I am party to prosper and grow. I want the dimensions of time that have been loosened from their foundations to entwine like a basket full of bright embroidery threads. But it seems that even for dreams, I have to work and wait. It hardly seems fair." End quote. It also might be surprising to learn that in the novel Shoeless Joe, Ray Kinsella has a twin brother named Richard. Richard is the son with the major falling out with the father, and he works at a carnival. What the director of the film and writer of the adaptation, Phil Alden Robinson, did was combine the characters of Ray and Richard into one person, Ray. So the falling out, the rift with the father happens to Ray. And it makes the ending that much more rewarding. But in the novel, Richard Kinsella is a drifter, and again, he works at a carnival. As Lawrence Kesenick noted,
Speaking of Field of Dreams, one thing that Phil Alden Robinson did was he really captured the kernel of the book. He honed it down to the strongest part of it.
and Richard, Ray's twin brother, feels like one of those loose parts, because when you remove him and add some of his traits to Ray, it doesn't feel like you're losing much. One storyline that's almost the same in both book and movie is the story of Doc Graham. But one major change is the only part of the book I would have liked to have seen played out in the film. And this is a great example of a real life moment tweaked toward the supernatural, and done brilliantly, in my opinion, by W.P. Kinsella. If you recall from the film, Ray Kinsella and Terence Mann drive to Chisholm, Minnesota, where they find out that Archie Graham did live there, and he'd been dead for years. So they ask around, and then there's this scene where Ray goes back in time at night and runs into the elderly version of Doc Graham. The way this plays out in the book has more depth and feeling, because in the book, Ray Kinsella and J.D. Salinger drive to Chisholm, and they ask around about Doc Graham, but nobody remembers much. They don't remember a lot about Doc Graham. But the more Ray and Salinger talk to people and really probe them and ask questions, the more people start to remember. And this really stirs up this entity of Archie Graham. He grows and grows. They stir up enough spirit that allows Graham to metamorphose into this palpable, physical human being. There's a great novel by Kevin Brockmeyer called The Brief History of the Dead. In this novel, there's an afterlife stopover city where people reside and exist for as long as at least one person on Earth remembers them. But when that last person on Earth forgets or dies, the person in the afterlife disappears. In reading this section from Shoeless Joe, I was reminded of this novel, because the more Ray and Salinger stirred up the memories of Doc Graham, the more the people in Chisholm remembered. And these memories rippled out to create more ripples, until the energy turned into an actual human being. I just love this scene, this beautiful culmination and metaphor. In real life, the most that can happen is a deep stirring of thoughts and memories and emotions. But in fiction, you can push it one step further and find out the answer to W.P. Kinsella's starting question, what if? Some people don't like fiction. They're strict adherents to nonfiction. They say there are plenty of inspiring, amazing, hard-to-believe stories right here in real life. Why fiction? This example right here is why. Probably the most significant change between book and film is the treatment of Ray's father, John Kinsella. In the movie, Ray, of course, talks about his father to Annie and Terence Mann. He talks about their fights when he was younger and the rift that was always between them, and how Shoeless Joe was his father's favorite character. But John Kinsella is only present in Ray's retellings and in his memory until the very end of the movie, when his actual father shows up on the field. It's a huge surprise. But in the novel, it's no surprise. As early as page 20, when Shoeless Joe tells Ray that there are other ghosts who'd like to come and play, Ray mentions his father. He says, quote, "I know a catcher. He never made the majors, but in his prime he was good, really good. Played Class B ball in Florida and California," end quote. And Shoeless Joe replies, quote, "We could give him a try," end quote. And then John Kinsella does show up earlier in the story. And again, it's not a surprise. So the tension here changes. The tension in the book, it builds about whether or not Ray is going to say something to his father. He knows he's out there. He watches him play, but he can't drum up the courage to approach him. Finally, he does, after talking with Eddie Sissons and J.D. Salinger. And this way of building tension, it does work, and it's often very effective. I think of the scenario as the known secret scenario, where one or more characters and the audience knows a secret, but one or more of the characters don't know. And just like it would be in real life, it's tense, waiting for that other shoe to drop. But between the novel and the movie, there's no question that the movie packs more of a punch in the unveiling of John Kinsella. And, by the way, John is the name of author Bill Kinsella's real-life father. Remember, Bill Kinsella swore up and down that he did not use autobiographical material in his works. He was an inventor. He created. But here, Ray's father has the same name as Bill's father. Ray's father, John, loved Shoeless Joe, and Bill's father, John, told stories about Shoeless Joe and the 1919 Black Sox. And I wonder what could have been going on under the surface of Bill Kinsella when he wrote about Ray Kinsella sitting next to his dying father, reminiscing about baseball, while in real life, Bill Kinsella turned his back on his dying father. Remember, Bill's father came back to religion in his final dying days, and Bill hated him for it. And decades later, Willie Steele asked him if he forgave his father, and Bill Kinsella said, absolutely not. He could have given Ray's father any name, and he chose the name John. One other major difference between the novel and the film is sequencing. The part with Ray and his twin brother and father happens in the second last section. The very last section is reserved for J.D. Salinger getting invited into the porn. I saw the movie long before I read the novel, so it's hard for me to imagine things not ending with the scene of Ray and his father. But having been exposed to both, it's hard to imagine how ending the story with a focus on J.D. Salinger could have worked. And yet it did. The book was not perfect. It had some loose plot lines and characters, and yet it was hugely popular with readers and critics. It still won an award that was not yearly, but only given out when warranted. People at the time were hugely satisfied with this book. Only when pushed into a corner, forced by the constraints of a film, did Phil Alden Robinson find a way to monumentally improve an already magnificent story. But that's for another episode. If you like the show and crave more content, you can become a Patreon member, where you'll have access to additional audio episodes, video interviews, and other articles and images linked to the show. Go to Patreon/Midnight Library of Baseball. And since this is a one-man production, every bit of support helps. You can donate at midnightlibraryofbaseball.com, and you can add reviews on iTunes and Spotify. Okay, back to the show. Okay, one last difference worth mentioning. And of course, there are many more, and those of you listening who know both the film and the book might have a dozen more ideas. But for me, this final eye-opening segment happens during J.D. Salinger's sermon, what becomes Terence Mann's People Will Come speech in the film. But there's a line in the book that's not in the film, and it's a big one. When J.D. Salinger, he's talking about the people who will come, families that will show up to the field, and he adds, quote, "But mostly, the arrivals will be couples who have withered and sickened of the contrived urgency of their lives." End quote. I love this line. Again, it's not in the film, but how true is this? I mean, now in 2024, how true is this? But this was Bill Kinsella writing this line in the early 80s, 40 years ago, about people getting sick from the contrived urgency of their lives, racing around with high blood pressure, anxiety, panic attacks, short tempers, and a myopic focus on the task ahead, all because of a contrived, imagined urgency. I know I've succumbed to this trap thousands of times in my life, getting anxious, feeling bad because I need to be doing more with this contrived urgency, this construct of an emergency, when in reality there is no emergency. There's no rush. It is possible to slow down, and yet much of the time we don't. We go on autopilot and miss entirely what's in front of us in the present. And here, Kinsella is calling out our culture, our society, for missing these opportunities and suffering the consequences because of it. And he's not saying don't make money, move into a commune in the woods and eat barley porridge every day. Kinsella was an opportunist. He wanted to succeed as a writer and make money. He was saying that you can follow your goals while stepping back and slowing down, while being present to take in the world, the details, the strange happenings, and precious relationships, and while not taking yourself too seriously. A good message perhaps not always practiced by the man of 1,000 complaint letters, but a good message nonetheless. We'll end tonight with a story from Kristen Klebanow, who has written multiple screenplays about baseball and whose deep history with baseball spans generations.
My name is Kristen Klebanow. My maiden name is Fishbaugh, which is known in Central Ohio for baseball because my dad has been around in the state of Ohio forever. He played ball at Ohio University, set a record for the most RBIs in one game. So he, before I was even born, he was very well known for hitting and got released by Cleveland Indians for bad reasons. He coached for over 34 years, and when he passed, suddenly, at the age of 66, right before he retired, there wasn't even standing room for his funeral, his celebration. And there was 5 of us. We had 4 girls, and then my little brother came along finally, and he got a boy. My sister, the oldest, she lived in the dugout with my dad, and she went on to become a really good coach. Won Coach of the Year 5 times. My dad and my sister have the most NCAA wins of a father and a daughter in history. My dad, to make some extra money, but he loved it. He started a hitting academy. And he ran that, and everybody came to him to learn hitting. And then my youngest sister, and she ended up going back and working with my dad. And then when he passed away suddenly, she had to run it on her own, which was devastating for all of us when my dad passed. It was terrible, but she's still running it to this day. And she has a lot of pros that would come in and work out. Paul O'Neill used to work out with my dad's team. My dad, he couldn't see very well. He had really bad eyesight, and he wore glasses, but he hid them from them. If they knew you wore glasses in baseball, scouts wouldn't even look at you. It's really sad because my dad was really good. And he ended up, like I said, he got drafted by the Cleveland Indians. And I didn't know this stuff because he's very humble. He never talked about it. My mom told us, and then we found articles in the newspaper after he died that he was released. He was devastated. Because baseball was so much a part of my life. And when my dad died in 1999, the only way I could survive is I thought, I got to start writing about him. So even before that, I loved writing, so I started just writing, and it's cathartic. It helped me heal from losing the pillar of our life, our father. With my screenplay, On the Black, I started really delving into the history of my mom and dad and what happened in their life at Ohio University and where he played. But baseball was always on my dad's mind. I mean, he got pulled over once because the cop thought he was drinking, but he always had his lineup in his hat too. He was thinking about what his lineup was going to be the next day. My favorite times were after my dad would coach. He always talked to the boys, he'd always huddle up, we're talking. That was my favorite, to listen to my dad talk to them about when, if they won, great. If they lost too. He imparted so much wisdom to these guys about life.
Yeah.
Through the game of baseball. It's the one constant. That's why I love the Field of Dreams. I mean, that movie is the best movie. And I like how much he loves his dad, but then also the father-daughter relationship was so important too. And my dad, he did go see the movie with us, which was a hard thing to get him to go, do anything because he was either on the road recruiting or scouting. But we got him to go to the movie with us, and I sat next to him. And the scene where, he says, "You want to have a catch?" And I looked at my dad, and he was crying. Never saw my dad cry. So now I'm crying. It was an emotional time for me, and I still remember it to this day.
You can find more about Kristen's work and writing accolades by looking up Kristen Mack, M-A-C-K, at Coverfly, IMDb, and on Instagram at Kristen Mack Writes. Kristen is currently seeking representation for her baseball film On the Black. Next time, how the fictional character of Eddie Sissons turned into a real-life syndrome.
And so I go in there, I said, where do you get off? Passing yourself off as a former New York Yankee. And he holds out his hand. He's wearing a World Series ring. And he said, there you go. And I said, I don't care if you're wearing jewelry. You didn't play for the Yankees. And he got up and he said, I have nothing more to say. I said, no, you have plenty to say. You've been lying. So he sat down and he said, okay, I'll come clean.
next time in episode 4. If you think this show's worth $1, please donate at the website midnightlibraryofbaseball.com or through Podbean. You can also leave a rating or review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast. Midnight Library of Baseball is produced by me, Ben Orlando. Music by Sergei Papkin and Ashot Danielyan. Good night.